March 5, 2009. The O2 Arena is vibrating. A roaring crowd, thousands of voices in unison, awaits the return of a legend. Michael Jackson steps into the light, announcing a comeback that the world believed would redefine music history. "This is it," he tells the crowd. "This is the final curtain call." At the time, it sounded like a promise of a grand finale. In hindsight, it was a prophecy. The July dates were promised, but they would never arrive. On June 25, 2009, the music stopped forever. Michael Jackson was found dead in his own home. While the global community collapsed in grief, a far more sinister narrative was unfolding behind closed doors. An investigation was launched, not just into a death, but into a conspiracy of pressure, addiction, and medical negligence. The central question remained: what really happened in those final, silent hours? To understand the end, we have to look at the hours preceding the tragedy. Footage from June 24th shows a man who, on the surface, looked energized. He was rehearsing with an intensity that bordered on desperation. But this energy was a mask. Ahead of him lay a monstrous mountain of work, 50 massive shows at the O2 Arena. Originally, the plan was modest, 10 concerts, but the demand was a tidal wave. The organizers, AEG Live, decided to inflate the number to 50. For Michael, this wasn't an opportunity, it was a sentence. He was a man who knew the limits of his own fragile anatomy. He had confided in those closest to him that his body simply could not handle that kind of sustained pressure. In a moment of raw vulnerability, he called his mother and admitted the truth. "Mom, I don't know if I can do this. I can't handle 50 shows." But AEG Live didn't see a fragile human, they saw a product. They claimed Michael had agreed to the dates voluntarily, but the reality was far more claustrophobic. Many biographers argue that Michael was cornered by a mountain of debt. The CEO of AEG, Randy Phillips, had effectively become the architect of Michael's daily existence. With $20 to $30 million already invested in the production, Michael was no longer the boss. He was an asset that had to perform at any cost. By early June, the facade began to crumble. Michael started missing rehearsals. He wasn't just tired, he was exhausted, fragile, and mentally shattered. The man who once memorized every breath of a performance now struggled to remember lyrics he had sung for decades. For the first time in his legendary career, he requested a teleprompter. Corinne Fay, a makeup artist who had seen Michael's face for over 20 years, later testified to a harrowing sight. By mid-June, the king of pop had withered. She recalled seeing his ribs pressing through his skin, a ghostly image of a man wasting away. By June 19th, the situation reached a breaking point. Michael was shaking from chills, disoriented, and unable to function. His choreographer, Kenny Ortega, found himself in the surreal position of feeding a global icon with a spoon, rubbing his freezing feet and wrapping him in blankets just to keep him conscious. Ortega knew. He felt in his gut that something was deeply wrong. He asked questions, and while Michael answered, the truth was hidden in the silence between the words. AEG Live was aware of this collapse, but their concern was devoid of empathy. Their goal wasn't Michael's health, it was his working condition. The pressure shifted to Michael's personal physician, Conrad Murray. Murray's loyalty was bought and paid for. His massive salary of $150,000 a month was funded not by Michael, but by the company. The evidence of this corporate coercion is found in a chilling email from AEG co-CEO Paul Gongaware to Kenny Ortega. In it, Gongaware explicitly reminded Murray that AEG held the purse strings, stating, "We want to remind Murray that it is AEG, not MJ, who is paying his salary. We want to remind him what is expected of him." When later questioned under oath, Gongaware played the game of selective memory, claiming, "I don't recall more than 30 times." He tried to dismiss the email as short-form communication, but the subtext was clear: get the patient working or lose your paycheck. But who was Conrad Murray? He entered Michael's life in 2006, initially treating Michael's daughter, Paris Jackson, for a simple cold. That small act of care earned him the ultimate prize, the trust of the most famous man on earth. By 2009, Michael was a man under siege, and he needed a doctor who wouldn't ask questions, someone who would provide medication without the hindrance of restrictions or medical formalities. Michael had been fighting a war with insomnia, chronic pain, and crippling anxiety for years. His arsenal consisted of powerful sedatives and painkillers, a dependency that began in 1984 after a horrific pyrotechnic explosion during a Pepsi commercial left him with severe burns. That accident didn't just scar his skin, it introduced him to a cycle of pain and relief that would never truly end. By 2005, following the trauma of a long and exhausting trial, the medication stopped being about physical healing. It became a chemical shield against paranoia and an unbearable internal void. Following the breakdown on June 19th, an emergency summit took place at the Jackson estate. Kenny Ortega, Conrad Murray, and AEG executives clashed. Murray, defensive and arrogant, snapped at Ortega, telling him to stop acting like an amateur psychologist and leave the health of the artist to the professional. Despite the director's pleas, the machine kept moving. Murray assured them the artist would be ready. The final days were a flicker of false hope. June 21st and 22nd were ghost days, missed rehearsals and minimal participation. But then came June 23rd. Suddenly, Michael returned to life. He was focused, energetic, and rehearsed at full intensity for 90 minutes. June 24th followed the same pattern. He was in a good mood. The world thought the king was back. But as the rehearsal ended and Michael returned home, the true nightmare began. 1:00 a.m. The insomnia returns. Michael asks Murray for a sedative. It fails. Asks for another. Still, the mind will not shut down. By 10:00 a.m., completely drained by hours of sleeplessness and desperate to be ready for England, Michael asks for the heavy hitter, a powerful anesthetic known in his circle as milk. Under intense pressure from his patient, the doctor relents. He administers the dose. At 10:50 a.m., Michael falls into a sleep from which he will never wake. At 11:50 a.m., Conrad Murray discovers that Michael is not breathing. But instead of the immediate, instinctive call to 911, Murray enters a period of baffling hesitation. While Michael's life hung by a thread, the doctor spent precious minutes on the phone with his girlfriend and his insurance agent. He believed his specialist status made the emergency services unnecessary. He believed he could handle it alone. It wasn't until 12:13 p.m., nearly half an hour after the discovery, that Murray finally reached out to Michael's assistant, Amir Williams. Even then, he lied. He didn't report a cardiac arrest. He claimed Michael had a bad reaction. Then came the final absurdity. Security guard Alberto Alvarez entered the room to find a medical farce. Murray was performing CPR with only one hand, on a soft mattress, a surface that makes chest compressions physically impossible. But the most damning part, before calling for an ambulance, Murray ordered Alvarez to help him hide the evidence. They spent critical seconds stashing medical vials and IV bags into bags. The doctor was more concerned with the evidence of the drugs than the life of his patient. When paramedics finally arrived, they found a man without a pulse. At 2:26 p.m., Michael Jackson was officially pronounced dead. But the horror didn't end at the hospital. Minutes after the death was confirmed, Murray asked the assistant for a ride back to the house to retrieve some cream that he wouldn't want the world to know about. It was a desperate, clumsy attempt to return to the crime scene and destroy the remaining traces of the milk that had killed the king. The assistant, sensing the deception, locked down the estate, ensuring the evidence remained for the investigators. The trial of Conrad Murray took place 2 years later. The doctor maintained a wall of denial, claiming that in a 2-minute window where he left the room, Michael had injected himself. But the forensic pathologist, Christopher Rogers, dismantled this theory. He testified that the level of sedation in Michael's system would have made it physically impossible for him to wake up and self-administer the drug. The verdict was clear: homicide. Murray was sentenced to 4 years, but due to prison overcrowding, he was released after 2. Today, he practices medicine again in the Caribbean, still clinging to his innocence. But we must see the larger picture. Conrad Murray was simply the final note in a long, tragic symphony of destruction. The 1984 accident opened the door to addiction. The 2005 trial burned away his internal peace, and the AEG contract turned his final days into a deadly business plan. The king of pop didn't just die of a drug overdose. He died from the weight of a world that refused to let him just be a man.